This is the Real Estate Investing Abundance Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. I know you're excited to get into today's show, but I have a very exciting announcement to share with you before moving to the show. We've just launched a complimentary and comprehensive webinar that, among other things, shows you how to legally use passive real estate investing to reduce your taxes, recession-proof your nest egg, and take the sting out of inflation. If you are curious to learn more, go to stevetucker.com/webinar. It is complimentary and only takes a couple of minutes of your time. Once again, that is stevetucker.com/webinar. I'll see you in the webinar. Enjoy today's show. Hello, enlightened investors. Welcome back to Real Estate Investing Abundance. I'm your host, Dr. Allen, and with us today is Adam Zach. And you probably remember Adam from our previous conversation. He was with us on Real Estate Investing Abundance number 331, which was about a month ago. And at that time, we were talking about Adam's journey from W-2 to financial independence while being a dad. And we had a wonderful conversation surrounding that particular topic. But we wanted to have Adam back because he also has a very unique approach to investing. And we wanted to delve into that and share those strategies and techniques with you today. So we're just going to get right on into this. And so welcome back, Adam. We're glad that you're with us today. And so just start us off by just giving us a general overview of what it is you do in real estate investing and just a brief sketch of how it is you go about that. And then we'll go into some detail once we get a broad overview of that.
Sure. Well, I'll dive into it. And yeah, it's come a long ways since changing furnace filters in a basement and doing hammering and nails just to get things going to now not even visiting the last 40 properties that we've ever been into. And so what this strategy that we're kind of calling reverse investing is the idea of finding the person first and the property second, almost like a private mortgage matchmaking. And was always curious of like, okay, if you want to buy a house, if you're blessed with cash, great. But if not, it seems like the only way to get an owner-occupied loan is with the bank, credit union, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and it seems to be the most cost-effective strategy. And so that's what hundreds of, millions of people have done for centuries. But also notice that if you don't have a 620 credit score, you don't meet their debt to income requirements, you don't meet their employment history, they basically just tell you no. And like, hey, come back to us when you had that. And I always thought that was a little bit funny. And I was like, well, as an investor, to me, it's kind of just a balance of risk to reward. And so their must-haves are credit score, employment history, and DTI, among, a few other factors. And I was like, well, if I'm an investor, really what I care about is the loan to value and what's the risk that I'm into it. I'm like, if you could do an FHA and it's 3.5% down, yeah, the bank is betting on 99% of those going well because they don't have room to screw up. And so I thought about this and I was like, okay, hypothetically, if someone had a 400 credit score, like nobody's touching them, I was like, what would have to happen for someone to buy them a home? And it'd be like, that's interesting. Well, the only thing I can think of is their skin in the game or the loan to value. If someone's willing to put $100,000 into a $200,000 house, that if they default, I get the home back, at whatever appraised value, maybe it's trashed after the fact, but just hypothetically, if I was buying something at 50% loan to value, would I loan to someone on that criteria? And although like intrinsically, I'm like, well, no, there's too many risks and all that stuff, but I was like, just mathematically, what could that be possible? And so that's where the idea stemmed from of like, well, what if we almost just did our own style of that and kind of gave investors the opportunity to assess their own risk based on loan to value, the borrower's strength, the home condition, the location, and then they set the terms for the client, which they could then accept if if appropriate. And so that's where this stemmed from, where we now are matchmaking investors with individuals, and we have different structures of whether it's a first position mortgage or a contract for deed or rent to own, just to kind of help balance the contractual work with some risk and reward. And so that's the process that we then implemented to do, a number of them to quit our W-2 jobs. And now there's such a high volume that instead of us buying the homes ourselves, we're playing more of the middleman and the matchmaker and just saying, hey, investor, what do you want? And what do you see as risk? And what do you think is an acceptable level of return? And how much skin do you want in their game? And if the other party agrees, hey, you got a match and away we go.
Well, Adam, I really like the way you think, and it's very analytical, and I like the way you look at the whole equation from this aspect of risk adjustment. And of course, it's a very, very different way of looking at it than, of course, the banking industry does. And I think that's why you have been so effective, is because there truly is that niche there. I mean, why should poor people be denied, or people, maybe they're not necessarily poor, but they have, for some reason or the other, their credit is screwed up and messed up. Why should they be denied a home? And I just think that's a really marvelous way to look at it. So go ahead, Adam, and let's just go through this step by step, how this process works.
Sure. So how we set this up is there's 4 steps. Number 1 is kind of what I call house hunting. Number 2 is under contract. Number 3 is initial closing. And then number 4 is the exit. So step 1, house hunting. What we do here at Home Equity Partner is we are collecting and finding all of these individuals, the people first that we call tenant buyers. So they're both a tenant and a buyer because they're committed to buying this property. So we're screening all of these individuals and giving them what our investors have deemed to be kind of acceptable levels of risk based on some underwriting criteria, kind of what the market is demanding. So we say, hey, you're super risky, 20% down. You're not as risky, 5% down. Okay, you're super risky. Here's a higher monthly payment. Oh, you picked a more rural location. That's a higher down payment, because if you're in the development of Austin versus you're in the middle of nowhere, North Dakota, like the likelihood of loss, has different factors. So we've built out this model of basically be like, hey, this is what our investors want. And then we give the tenant buyers, quote unquote, pre-approval letters or terms that they can have a housing budget, a price, an option, that, or a down payment that they're putting down. And then they get to tell us yes or no. And so they say, hey, I like that. I'm going to go shopping. So then they go out shopping, they pick the house. We'll actually submit the offer using a real estate agent that the tenant buyer chooses. So they actually get to pick the agent. They get to figure out the location, all that stuff. We'll submit the offer with those terms that we provided to them. And once it's under contract, it goes one of 2 ways. And so then once it's under contract, we either assign it to investors, like an individual, maybe an entity, and then it kind of proceeds. We call that option 1A, or 1B is we'll take title, and we have, I'll call it a number of individual passive investors that don't want to be on title. They just say, hey, take my money at 10% interest, just give me monthly interest only payments. So then we'll take title to some of them as well. And so that's kind of the 1A and the 1B of how the money is getting financed. To this, the active investor might get a loan from Wells Fargo, take title on the property, get an 80% loan to value. And so there's the due diligence period, which is in this, under contract part 2, which is the typical earnest money. It's the inspection, you got the financing and the appraisal contingency. And if we get through all of that, then you're like, okay, now we're getting ready to close. Any questions there on kind of step 1 of how we're screening them, and then kind of step 2 of getting it under contract and either keeping it or assigning it?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions. Well, first of all, how are you discovering these particular buyers?
Sure.
So start with the people. Where do you go to find these people?
The majority of where our traffic comes today, it started off all word of mouth from agents, bankers, networks, and now we're using marketing, a lot of Google ads. Turns out there's 130,000 people searching rent to own every month. It's crazy how many people, like, if you, they have the levels of like low, medium, and high. And like, this is like up there with like how to get best rates. Like there's so many people searching for it that we're just tapping into that market and just saying, hey, we're an option in addition to here's our competitors. And we got a podcast educating our tenant buyers saying, here's the problems with lease to own. Here's maybe what to avoid if you're doing this. So we kind of have some a podcast, free content. We got people referring to us, and then we got a paid marketing engine that we're getting, a couple thousand website visits a week and hundreds of people saying, hey, I'm interested in this. Tell me more. So that's kind of the very first part
Okay.
of the funnel.
Okay. So, I thought maybe you were scrubbing county records and different things like that, but you were actually running ads and doing podcast and word of mouth. So those are really primarily your sources of doing that. And
Specifically for finding the tenant buyers. Yep. Investors is a whole nother, just
yeah,
general networking and
it's a
people
whole
that hear
different
about
thing.
us.
Yeah. So run this by me again. How many did you say people are looking for rent to own
So there's
on?
130,000 according to like Uber suggests or Neil Patel's, kind of search engine that are
Mhm.
searching rent to own every month into
Every
just
month?
Google.
And this is
And that
nationwide.
Yep, across the United States. And
Okay.
there's actually even little keyword hot charts where you can figure out where people are searching it the most. It's
Hmm.
mostly the Midwest down to the Southeast where the price
Really?
to rent ratios, and that's kind of our service market area
Mhm.
because that's a little bit more attractive. Doing rent to own in like California or New York, just because they're maybe more tenant friendly, and the a $500,000 home there rents for 2,500, and you're
Mhm.
playing more of the appreciation game versus the Midwest to Southeast. It's more of a 1% rule type thing, which
Mhm.
investors find a little bit more attractive because they're looking more for cash flow because they're not getting the appreciation upside. That's what the tenant buyer is getting,
Mhm.
accustomed to. So not saying that we can't do those areas. Larger people doing thousands of these like Divvy Homes or Home Partners of America. These are two big national companies that are doing the exact same model as us, maybe just a little bit of a different flavor, are doing these in like the top 15 metros in the
Mhm.
United States, but they're only doing the metros, whereas we'll take a consideration anywhere in the United States.
Well, let's go into this is how you are getting the tenant buyers. So, what do you do to go find the investors?
It used to be it was just friends, family, here we go. And then they just start telling other people. And now we kind of have a list of call it 50 to 60 investors that we have relationships with. So once a tenant comes through and they're like, hey, here's the terms, we'll send it out. And it turned into the hey, does anybody want it? Like type thing of like crossing our fingers to now we actually just built like a bidding system. So someone says, ooh, that person's like really low risk, here's what I'm willing to bid on it, which then helps the tenant buyers because we're making money on some assignment fee. But the more competitive or the more investors that we have, just the supply and demand will then drive down the costs over time. And so right now we're not doing any marketing other than just, word of mouth and referrals. No one really can find us unless they're listening to like a great show like this or they reach out. That's all we're doing for now.
Wow, that's amazing that you're not doing any advertising, any marketing, and you're still finding those investors to really keep your business rolling. Well, give us a little more detail on the bidding process.
Sure. So, assuming that we have a property under contract, we create what's called a deal sheet. And it says, here's everything about this deal. Here's the locked in contract price. Here's what the tenant buyer has agreed to buy it back over the next, 3 years. So, here's like their buyback price. Here's their monthly credit. They get to enter in like if they're doing it all cash or using debt financing. So maybe it's a 7% interest rate over 25% or over a 25-year amortization. Here's some stuff for management, for capex, like all the typical like rental property information of like, okay, here's what your cash on cash return might be. Here's what your ROI would be, your profit, depending on how long you hold it. They have a dynamic sheet that they can play with. That's just kind of the numbers basis of like, hey, is this a good investment? Typically, investors like, what's the cash on cash? What's the cash flow? How much cash do I need? And then it's like, okay, if that meets their criteria, part two is like, okay, well, what's the home condition? Where is it located? And what's the tenant buyer profile? So then we give them a summary without sharing, personal information. It's like, in general, here's the story of why the tenant buyer can't get a home. They're moving from Tennessee to Texas. They got a job offer letter. They're making, $200,000 a year, but their employment history isn't going to count because it's not like Fields. But by the way, they're going to be switching from here to here. We verify that. And then here's their debt to income ratio. Here's their ballpark credit score. Here's the location of the home. Here's the neighborhood ratings. Here's the population. And then here's, and it's a pending inspection report. So they get to see, okay, what's the condition of the home? And then eventually they'll get an appraisal. So it's like, okay, here's the numbers. Here's the tenant buyer profile. Here's the location. Here's the home condition. Based on all of this information, what makes this a deal for you? And they get to play a little bit with like how much they're willing to pay for the deal or the opportunity to take on this deal.
Enlightened investors, if you haven't done so already, be sure and click that like button and also click that share so others can take advantage of the content. And finally, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our upcoming episodes. Interesting. So a lot of complexities there, but you have systematized this and you have worked through all of this. Go into detail about that system that you put together.
We screen them like a landlord and a loan originator would. Turns out, so I got my registered mortgage loan originating license. And then even though I can only do it in a certain amount of states, but like understand that process from a front end to back end debt to income ratio, what they need to get, to an FHA loan, what those percentages are. So it's like we screen them both like that. And like an investor would, which is like, what's your past rental history, which doesn't show up on a credit score. Some of it's starting to get reported now, but like then looking at like bankruptcies, evictions, foreclosures. So it's like, we'll do almost like that entire underwriting. And then we summarize it into a one sheet. Mm-hmm. What's their income? What's their credit score? What's their debt to income? Like, here's like what you need to know. And if you want to drill down more, you can provide a little bit of information, but it would be kind of like, hey, Alan, turns out I'm an entrepreneur because I left my civil engineering job 2 years ago. The bank won't touch me at all. But would you be willing to buy me a $400,000 house if I gave you $120,000 up front? And you'd say, well, depends. What's like the equivalent interest rate? And I'd be like, well, I'll make one even better. You take title from the home. You can get a line of credit. Use that as much as you want. Let's say you want to put $280,000 into the home. Or maybe we want to put $0. All you're doing is you're calling up your lender and saying, hey, I want a 70% loan to value on this home. Adam's going to bring the 120. Alan's into this for zero cash. And you're paying an equivalent interest rate of, let's say, 7%. So maybe your mortgage payment is $2,200 a month, and I'm paying you $3,200 a month. And you're like, cool. For no money in, I could cash flow roughly $1,000 a month. Adam's super happy because I got to go pick a really nice house here in Fargo. All Alan did was leverage the fact that the bank will give him money. And if Adam defaults, Alan has a house at $280,000 versus the value of $400,000. Mm-hmm. And so you might ask a few more questions if I'm not putting 30% down, but on paper, it's like, that seems like a pretty good deal, but you'd still want to know, okay, like, is Adam this criminal? Like, what's his credit score? What's his background? And so like, we'll do that due diligence kind of just to check the box and be like, hey, by the way, he's got an 800 credit score. This was his employment history. Here's what his taxable income is. Here's, his pay stubs, whatever it would be. And then here's a background judgments and collection search to make sure like there's not anything else funny. So you're like, oh, okay, well, if there was red flags there, you might want more down. Or if there's no red flags, you're like, it turns out, Adam, if you only want to put 20% down, like I feel pretty good about this, about this transaction. And so that's all. Not to oversimplify it, but that's kind of literally a transaction that I would propose to Alan. Is Alan, mm-hmm. No matter how hard I try, no matter how many banks I smooth, I make negative money on my adjusted gross income because I own so much rental property. Sometimes they add in the depreciation, but like on paper, I look completely unbankable. And it's like, mm-hmm. oh, how in the world do I live? Right. Mm-hmm. But to them, it doesn't matter that I got an 800 credit score. It's all about that DTI. When your income is zero, it doesn't matter. You're never going to get to a debt to income ratio. And I know this now from being the loan originator side. And so sometimes there's like credit unions that'll like bend the rules and lend out their own money, which is a great place for entrepreneurs or different people to go. But in general, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they're not going to touch me like at all. And so it's like almost building the system of like, why would I not do that? Especially if I'm locked into a 2.5% interest rate and I don't want to move, that's another thing. But if I'm moving because of family, a job or something, and I have no options, like, okay, well, I'm either going to rent something and I can pick from one of 100 houses, or if Alan's willing to leverage his credit and buy me a home, I get to now not pick from 100 rentals that might have something. I could actually go shopping out of the 10,000 homes for sale because there's like 100-to-1 ratio of rentals versus homes for listing, just from a general inventory. And you're like, cool, Alan, will you buy this home for me, assuming these terms? And if you say yes, I say yes. Okay, we have maybe and this is where home equity partner comes in. We're almost like the third party mediator, being like, okay, you said you were going to do this, and here's the contracts. And the day we close, Alan doesn't show up. He signs the paper, sends it all in. Adam brings in his money to the title company. And as soon as we close, like A to B, B to C, lease option, everything's signed. Okay, the keys come to Adam. I move in and set the utilities up in my name. And now Alan's just waiting for kind of step number 4, which is now in 2024, 2025, when Adam starts showing more income from my taxable side. We always want there to be an exit strategy. That's why it was house hunting, under contract, initial closing, and then the exit. Because if I have no intention of buying back the home, well, financially it might be in your best interest, but that's not what we want, right? Because to Alan, he might say, please don't buy this home. I'd rather just take his 120,000 and, go sell the property and make, 80 grand on it. But that's not how we set this up. It's like, okay, Adam, what's your plan to get mortgage eligible? Okay, well, it turns out when I'm first starting off, we show off a lot of, different income, but now every year it's been climbing up. And so I expect in 2 years, X, Y, and Z to happen. I'm going to go get a mortgage, and then I'll basically buy you out at the 280 price, or maybe it's 290 because you got to make some profit in there too, in addition to the monthly cash flow. But at the same time, your mortgage then got paid down to 275 or 260. So get $1,000 a month in cash flow. And then when I cash you out, in addition to putting no money down, you maybe walk away with 10 or 20K. And that's why it's been super attractive to investors if we can structure it that way. And the down payment plays a big factor into that. And then we put even another icing on the cake, which is called rent guarantee insurance, which is almost like a private mortgage insurance that I had no idea existed. Turns out Alan can place rent guarantee insurance on Adam so that if I default for $83 a month, you get 6 months of that $3,200 a month payment until you either sell or re-rent it. So now your biggest liability of Adam not making payments gets not completely mitigated, but somewhat mitigated. And so our whole goal is, how can we make it so good for investors that it'd be dumb to say no? And so not only is it like you're maybe lending to unbankable people, which makes it riskier. The thought was, okay, what do banks do? Oh, they just do private mortgage insurance. I was like, oh, great, I'll put private mortgage insurance on this. And like, oh, you can't do that. I was like, well, that's dumb. You should be able to do that. And so then just search, and turns out there's 3 different companies, the guarantors, Leap Easy, and now Single Key is coming into there, that apartment buildings everybody can use. But like, I had never heard of that before. So now we're making the tenant buyers, or Adam in this case, pay the extra $80 a month for rent guarantee insurance. And then the more coverage, or the more risky you are, the more coverage you get. So that if something were to go wrong, you basically have a 10 to 30 grand insurance policy against them defaulting. Sorry, I went on a long rant there to your simple question, but like, just I love how this has kind of come together, and it's just so fun how real estate, how you can leverage all these different things just to kind of get into our niche that other investors could probably steal different ideas, go do this yourself, in your background. Even with existing inventory, we happen to do this with no inventory. We started with inventory and we just list it. Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, Turbo Tenant, and just say, hey, we got 123 Main Street, rent to own. They could see and feel and touch and visit the property. But then we had to buy the inventory. We had to wait a couple months. So now this is the way that we connect Alan with Adam, and just say, hey, you have 0 vacancy. The day you close is the same day you collect your first amount of rent. And that's kind of the gap that we're then closing, so that you don't have to buy inventory and then hope that a tenant buyer is there. You already have it lined up. And if the tenant buyer walks away, Alan's out for no money.
Yeah, I appreciate that explanation. There's still a lot to learn in conjunction with this, but we're getting there, and at least certainly we're getting, I think, a general idea of how this works. Adam, you had said that you find your clients through word of mouth, basically, and referrals. So, how do we get in touch with you to work with you in conjunction with this particular interesting method?
Sure. So what we've started, and this isn't a public facing domain, but if you go to homeequitypartner.com/investors, that's the only way you can get to it is if you directly type it in. You can't find it from our website because we're all tenant buyer facing. Homeequitypartner.com/investors. There's a free lease option contract there. So we've paid thousands of dollars to get lease option contracts. And this is just one way of, making this contract work. It's a lease and an option agreement. So that some agreements, we've had attorneys that we paid a lot. So if you go there, you can just download a free copy of what we've paid bunch of real estate attorney fees to get to, and you could start doing this yourself, or you could, in addition to that, you can sign up to have a conversation with me, talk about it, and then even get access to some of these deals that we're sending out.
And all of Adam's information will be in our show notes. Adam, another question I have here is, what is the general time frame from the lease option to the exercising of the option? And what's your criteria for establishing that?
So we give everyone as a default, the standard is kind of 3 years, but with a sliding purchase price scale. So the sooner they buy it back, the lower the price is. But the longer they wait, it's like, let's say you just bake in 4% appreciation a year. So a $200,000 house, you get to buy it back for 208,000, then 216,000, then 224,000, in a period of years. So it incentivizes them the sooner that they buy it back, but also on the investor to get some sort of fixed appreciation per year built into it. Now, in 2021 or 2022, when it went nuts, investors were like, oh, I wish I just bought a rental property. The tenant buyers got the better end of the deal. But at the same time, if it went the other way, the tenant buyers, they have the option to buy, but not the obligation. And so there is some give and take between the two, because you can't, there's a little bit of constraint, so you have to take that into consideration with the risk and the reward. So in general, we give everyone 3 years with the option to extend for another year. We've noticed that if you haven't done this in 3 to 4 years, there's probably something else going on, and there might have to be a different type of a conversation. But in general, we don't want to be like, oh yeah, you can get your taxes done in the next 6 months, right? And if they don't, they lose 120,000. I've seen people do that, where it's like all they're trying to do is get people into a home, take their down payment, kick them out, and go do it again. And it's like, nope, that is not the intent, and that is not what this is set up for. So let's give them up to 3 years. We used to do 5 years. Now we're set on 3 years because most commercial loans are like a 5-year term, 20-year AM. And so we want there to be like 3 years, maybe the option to extend. But then that way, if you lock in a 5-year fixed term, you're not subject to, okay, in 5 years, when the interest rate changes, but they've locked in a rent price for 5 years or 6 years or however long it is, like if your interest rate changes, you want that to be, subjective. So the whole goal is you lock it in 5-year fixed, 20 or 30-year AM, and then that your interest rate is not changing and not subjective to what people have gotten into 3 or 4 years ago, where they did a 1, 3, or 5-year term. And now it's like, oh, my interest rate went from 3% to 7%. We're just recycling that money then. And what a lot of investors do is once they sell, they'll just 1031 it into another tenant buyer that we have coming down the pipeline.
Wonderful. Well, tell us about the exit day.
Certainly. So now that they have this, whether it's a lease with an option to buy, a contract for deed, or a first position mortgage on the home, there's maybe different contractual ways of structuring this. We just like lease with an option because it's the cleanest. They will go to a loan originator and a title company, and we could help facilitate that. But most oftentimes they already have a banking relationship, and they just say, hey, here's my option contract. Here's how much I owe. I would like to do a purchase of this home with this loan, and here's the title company. Now, the loan officer will typically reach out to us and be like, hey, like they want to buy this home. Here's like, are you doing a new purchase and sale agreement, or is this option agreement correct? And if it is, what's the updated kind of statement of balance? And then the loan officer, the title company, take it from there. And we're just like a normal for sale by owner. So Alan's buying the home for Adam. We draft up the contract. So now when Adam's going to buy back the home from Alan's not relisting it, paying a realtor 6%, even though the realtor got the money on the initial closing. Like when Adam went house hunting to begin with, the agent got paid by the seller's agent in that case. Upon the exit after the initial closing, it's just a for sale by owner transaction where you have a $500 in closing fees. I have my own loan origination fees, different pieces that come into it. But eventually, then I basically bought you out. You're off a title. I'm now on title with the first position title is exchanged, and all of that fun stuff.
And wealth of information. Thank you so much for coming back on the show and sharing this very interesting strategy with us. Thanks for being with us today.
You're welcome. You had a lot of great questions, and it was fun to dive into all the different steps and stages, and hope someone got great value out of this on not only just, if they want to do this themselves or different ways that they can tweak their own business to maybe reverse engineer this to say, hey, how can I close with the least amount of risk? What assumptions do I have right now? That is it assuming that I'm going to get it rented? Is it assuming that my interest rate is going to be this? Is it assuming a certain condition? Like, you can make an offer contingent upon a signed lease before you even close on the home. So just kind of reverse engineering some things to reduce the risk of any investment deal that you're getting is something that I would just advocate for. And this is one way that we've done that to kind of match make it so that the same day that you close is when you get the income as well. So appreciate you having me.
Thank you, Adam.
Enlightened investors, wait, don't go just yet. I just want to remind you about our recently launched webinar that you will not want to miss. If you're at all curious and would like to learn more about how real estate investing can diversify your investment portfolio, alleviate the anxiety associated with Wall Street swings, leverage your 401ks and IRAs to substantially increase the return on your investment, and do all of this with turnkey, hands-off passive real estate investments, then you'll want to immediately go to stevetalker.com/webinar. In the webinar, we'll also address the common dubious investment schemes that you want to avoid. To access the webinar, go to stevetalker.com/webinar. I look forward to seeing you in the webinar.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Estate Investing Abundance, brought to you by Steve Talker Capital, a company working for passionate professionals like you to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steve Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steve Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. For resources to develop your financial independence, connect with us at stevetalker.com.